So I think we're about 5 minutes after. So at this point, I'll turn it over. Corey, anything you just like to say by welcome before we get
Yeah,
started?
I would love to, Alex. Firstly, hi to everyone in our community. It's Tuesday, so it's the day that we get to see each other and that we get to have these important discussions about sharing important information related to our industry, which really excites me because I want all of us to be winning. I want all of us to be happy and feel comfortable and finding new solutions as our industry continues to evolve. So I'm really excited to have Alex Haley with us here. Um, and I think it's such an important topic when your business model breaks. What Alex told me beforehand that he's going to do is there's a lot of information and insights related to what has happened as business models have broken and evolved over time. So I personally am really excited to hear about that and see where all of this goes. A little bit about Alex. Alex Haley is a researcher, a meditation teacher, and a former legal, we're going to come to this in a second, a former legal and business manager for small and large companies. He was also a co-manager of a donation-based yoga studio, so he's one of us, and is one of the co-founders of the public benefit corporation Offering Tree, which provides an all-in-one platform for wellness professionals to build a website, manage schedules and registrations, accept payments, and coordinate email communication. So Alex, a big welcome. As you know, anything Conscious Council related and law, we make it fun. And I feel like the two of us today are going to hit it out of the park. You're going to do most of the talking around this topic, but the requirement with Conscious Council is anything, when lawyers are involved, it's going to be fun. Can you do that?
Oh, I can. I can commit. I love that. That should be part of the oath we have to take. So that's great. I love it. So thank you, Corey. I'm delighted to be here too. Again, hope to really keep this engaging, keep it fun, but also informative so that you walk away feeling like that was a good use of an hour of my time. That's really, that's my challenge. I will promise to uphold that end of the bargain and really just welcome your, your questions and also your insights, because this is what I'm going to share today is kind of collective wisdom from a lot of different sources, but it's not definitive. So please add in your own experiences, what you've learned, and we can learn together as a community. I'll also just invite Corey at any point to chime in if you want to, go deeper or grab a question from the Q&A. I'll try to monitor it myself, but as is the case with Zoom, it kind of fragments attention. So if I don't track it right away, I'll look to Corey and Jake to maybe help with that a little bit. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So let me make sure that, can you all see that? You can see the slides. Is that sharing correctly on the screen? If you just put it in the chat to let me know that you can see that. Yes, great. Okay, wonderful. So if at any point they go away, let me know. So again, welcome. I'm delighted that you're all here today. And what I want to do is just share a minute or two about Offering Tree, who we are. Corey already mentioned that we're a benefit corporation, and our mission, we have a public mission, is to further wellness education and access. And so we do this in a couple of primary ways. One way is to get greater community access to wellness resources. And we also are really about supporting the livelihood of teachers and also of small studios. So helping them to grow, helping them to thrive. If I had to distill everything that we do down into a very short, explanation, it would be that we do website scheduling, payments, and email. It's all in one place and it's all at one price. And then the last thing that we really pride ourselves on is being a learning community of wellness professionals. So we have studios, yoga teachers, we have meditation teachers, dance instructors, coaches, healers. We have all kinds of health and wellness professionals. So that's just a little bit about Offering Tree. Very passionate about this. So the other thing is that the founders of Offering Tree are health and wellness professionals themselves. So, I'm a meditation teacher. A lot of our founders are yoga practitioners. We have a deep passion for, this space and for really trying to help and support everyone that's in the community. So with that, I want to just set a little bit of context for the remarks I'm going to share today. So as we're on this call today, and this is updated, I looked at this actually just before the call. So, I promised we were going to have fun, but at the same time, there needs to be a little bit of reality about what we're dealing with. There is a serious pandemic going on. We're 9 months into this pandemic since the World Health Organization declared it March 11th. There's been 55 million worldwide cases. And in fact, just yesterday, that number was 54 million. And I had to update it this morning, unfortunately, because they were in the middle of a surge. There's been 1.3 million deaths worldwide, and the US is leading it, followed closely by Brazil and third by India. So it's important to name this and to have it, hold it in the space. And it's also important to mention this part, that we may all be in the same storm. We're all going through a pandemic, but we're not all in the same boat. So I just also want to set this as a kind of contextual piece, which is that to acknowledge the sort of racial and ethnic disparities that are happening in the middle of this pandemic, particularly in the BIPOC community. Also recognizing socioeconomic disparities and geographic disparities, to name just a few. So while I offer all of these insights today, I want to just make a caveat that this isn't a kind of one solution fits everything, because it can be too easy to talk about an average and say, well, in general or on average, this is what works. And I really want to just sort of deeply respect differences at the same time that we talk about things that can be helpful, things that are similar. So another bit of context, mental health impacts. We know that basically as a result of the pandemic, anxiety it's had about almost a 2 times increase. And so this is from some studies that were done very recently. And if we look at depression, a 3 times increase pre-pandemic to during the pandemic that we're in right now. So again, this is some of the context that we're finding ourselves in, both personally and with our colleagues, with our family, with our communities. And it's a really important piece, because for us as health and wellness professionals, to know that what we do really matters, particularly in the midst of the skyrocketing anxiety, depression that's as a consequence of this pandemic. Sleep health. So another just data point as a context, recent study that was just done. So, and this is just within the US. I'm not trying to be US centric, but this is just the data that I could get access to fairly readily. The trends tend to parallel across the globe, but that's why this is US data. So US adults are reporting an additional day of difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, and just not feeling rested. And we also know that the incidence of sleep problems, that's both falling asleep and staying awake, it's doubled. So again, this is just another marker of the context of what we're in. In terms of the economic impacts, I think to me, when I saw this graph, this was painful, because I think this graph in a way sums up the reality of so much of what we have seen or we've experienced within our communities, or even ourselves if we've had to close our business. So what you'll see on this is that basically as of March, so again, the pandemic was officially declared on March 11th, you'll see that there was a huge number of businesses that were temporarily closed. And there were a significant number of businesses that permanently closed. So this is about a month in to the pandemic. But notice that as we get into about 3 months and beyond, we start to see a shift. There's an inflection point where the number of temporary closings of business is going way down, and the number of permanently closed businesses is going way up. And if you look at the difference, right, so it's almost a 3 times difference, a little less than 3 times, it's probably 2.5 time difference between permanently closed businesses at the beginning, so around April, to this is bringing it up to about September. So again, just to kind of provide the context for this and why this is so difficult. And if we look at why is this the case, well, we know that businesses have had to, whether you're a studio or even if you're just a solo yoga teacher or a solo meditation teacher, and if you were teaching in-person classes, there are all these new health restrictions, right? You had to make sure that you were limiting capacity, you were limiting the hours, you had to deal with perhaps the partisan nature of wearing a mask versus not wearing a mask, and having to deal possibly with clients that had very differing views on that, and what to do when there's an actual health mandate that says, no, you're required to wear a mask. and also the inability to access government support. So even though there was, at least in the US here, there was the CARES Act, it was extremely difficult if you were a small studio or if you were a solo teacher to access any of that support. So that meant that all of that burden and that financial risk and the operational difficulty fell onto your shoulders. So again, just a little bit of context for some of the insights that I'll share. Last little context. So this is specific impacts on the health and wellness industry. And what we know, and this is as of fairly recently, and it's always evolving because we're learning new things, but these are some of the key takeaways. We know that behaviors are likely permanently altered from social distancing experiences. So that means that since we've gone through this experience of social distancing, people have already started to adapt their behaviors, and some of those behaviors are likely not going to totally revert back. So what this means is that things like telehealth, so visiting your doctor or visiting somebody else that you see on a routine basis via Zoom is much more common, and people are getting used to having that as an option, which means that even after this pandemic ends, and when it ends, we're still going to see people having this behavior of possibly expecting to still be able to access something remotely. And this means that hybrid models are going to be a lot more common. So this is, even post-pandemic, things like, can I have a virtual session where I can use some in-home equipment, whether that's smart equipment or, an app-enabled option. So that's where you'll see the use of apps is just skyrocketed during this pandemic. There's also the familiarity with virtual experiences. So it may mean that in the past, I used to go every single day to my local community gym because I loved being able to go there, and that was part of my behaviors. But post-COVID, I might have a couple of days where I go, and then a couple of days where I expect to still have a virtual option. So this means that having flexibility, designing for flexibility is really important. We actually had another speaker who talked just on that topic about how you can do it, but this idea of having multiple access points. So one of the key trends that or some key trends that we know about are there's the shift that's been happening pre-pandemic, but it's accelerated because of the pandemic. So health and wellness, there was this sort of celebrity piece, which is that like, okay, there were influencers, there were key people in the field that were really driving, the messaging and driving even some of the formats of how things were being offered, whether that was in person or online. And what we're seeing now is that there's a very big shift to a community focus. So it's less about me, a particular celebrity or an influencer. It's much more about we. So it's community driven. There are requests by communities to have a voice in decision making, to have some influence about how things are discussed. And this is a really important shift because it means that we're actually moving from a kind of a consolidated model with a few people kind of being at the top to a much more distributed model that's community based. The other thing that another big trend that's been happening, and this was happening pre-COVID, but again, it's been accelerated because of COVID, is that a lot of health and wellness was catering towards the kind of elite, which would be expensive. Do you have resources? Do you have the money to be able to participate in these unique experiences or these, very aspirational kind of events? And now we're seeing that it's shifting much more to everyday experiences. So accessible, affordable. So this would be things like, just walking as opposed to going to a really high-end designer, gym that's maybe focused on these very specific high-end exercises with a high price point. People are saying, no, I'm opting to go outside and to do things with friends or other community members, or if my local gym supports that, or if my yoga teacher or my meditation teacher is, available to doing things outside or with community members, that kind of shift is happening. And also that means that there's a real price sensitivity. So there's a real demand for affordability, and this is increasing. Again, this happened pandemic, but it's been accelerated, this idea for really wanting to make things affordable. And that's also an aspect of it being accessible. So this means it's difficult if you are a studio owner, or if you are a yoga teacher, meditation teacher, coach. It means that there is a kind of price sensitivity now. So even if you have memberships, or if you have class packages or things like that, there's a lot more around consumers being sensitive to that. Many of you may have seen this, right? Many of you may have already experienced this. Let me just check and pause for a second after I do this last one, which is this last trend is sort of this broadening of well-being. So well-being shifting from just mind, body, spirit to well-being being much more encompassing. So this idea that there's financial well-being, there's environmental well-being, there's well-being that is connected to one's purpose, a sense of meaning in your day-to-day activities, and also a well-being that's beyond me as an individual, that actually is more of a we. So however we define that we, and I know that that we is defined very differently and can be defined differently. So that is, that's part of the shift, some of the key trends that are happening. Yeah, so there's a question in here. Thank you, Ivana, about how do we compete with free offerings? This is one that I get so much, and I'm going to talk more about that in the next section when we look at insights. One of the key things with free offerings is that, we need to not be shy about communicating the value that we're providing. And this can be very difficult. I know for myself as a teacher, the topic of money, the topic of talking about it can be kind of taboo. And yet, if we don't, it means that as a teacher or as an owner for a studio, it can be quite, it's unsustainable, because if everything that you provide is offered for free, and there isn't a reciprocal kind of generosity, obviously some schools and traditions operate entirely on generosity-based models. But if that is not the understanding within your community, or just where you are living locally, then it also means that you have to be an educator. You have to step into that role and say, this is my livelihood, this is what I do, and I really need the support of the community to continue to be able to teach and to offer these classes. And being able to name that and say that this is part of a tradition of students and teachers supporting one another in this process. So it's a really important question, and I'll keep coming back to some of these as I go into kind of the next section. Any other questions? I'm just looking here. There's a question about how much of that price sensitivity is self-inflicted because we all started to give our services away for free. Yes, thank you. This is a really important question, which is that many of you may have noticed this phenomenon with apps, because there are so many apps that are out there that are offering things for free. It means that there has been a declining willingness to pay, because it's sort of like, well, I can go onto YouTube, or I can go into an app and I can get this for free. So why is what you're providing any different? And again, this I think would go back to my earlier point about we have to be an educator. We have to explain why this is different, and why what's being offered and what's being provided is of value. It has worth, and it's important. And if people value and find value and worth in it, then to find a way to support that. And there are many ways to support that, right? I don't want to narrowly define this just as financial support, but financial support being a big one. So if you're able to provide and support, then please do. So that again speaks to you being beyond just a teacher, and you actually being in that role of having to do education. And that can be difficult. That can be a really tough place to be. So let me go to the next section, but as I'm doing that, again, feel free to chat anything in the either in the Q&A or in the chat box. And also, even if you have your own experiences of how have you been able to talk about this, or how have you thought about this issue of kind of the movement to expect everything should be free. And this is a really tough question, right? So in terms of insights, this is what I can share based on a lot of different data sources. So I'll just name this. This is based on some larger reports that have been done. This is based on community voices, talking to various communities. This is even insights based on our own community at Offering Trade, what people have learned in terms of how to survive in the middle of this pandemic when their business model broke. So there are three facets, and you have to apologize me here. This is my graphic art ability. This is about the maximum extent you get of it. I tried to do a little like, jewel-like figure. So that's kind of what it is. It's meant to be facets of like a, I don't know, maybe like some kind of gem, but that's what it is. So to try to help you remember these three areas of adaptation, collaboration, and innovation. And let me take each one of these. So this is a quote from professor at the University or Columbia University. I'll just pause for a minute so you can read it. So this is a painful quote to read, right? Because you can substitute fitness business with yoga business, with meditation, with coaching, with massage, with whatever, and it's going to be true. And so this is a real challenge because for those of us that weren't already online or weren't already in this space, it meant that there needed to be a rapid pivoting and this sort of exponential learning curve that we felt like we had to sprint up, all at the same time that we were dealing with our own personal situations and the situations of our family and our communities in the midst of this pandemic. So this is a huge challenge. And I just want to really kind of acknowledge and honor, all of you in your efforts to try to navigate. This is not easy. I mean, it's, the term unprecedented has been thrown around so much. And I think it's been used so much that it kind of diminishes the challenge and the perseverance that's needed as we're all navigating this pandemic. And so what do we know about what has worked in terms of adaptation? These are kind of my best attempt to roll up some of the key learnings about those that were able to adapt and actually survive with, I would say, a lot less suffering than those that struggled a lot more, weren't able to adapt as quickly. And these are kind of the spectrum. So that's why I put them up here. So this first spectrum, as many of you may have experienced, there's a kind of wait and see approach, right? So if your mindset was, I'm going to wait and see, I think this is going to be over in about 3 months. I think that after we do a lockdown, it'll be okay. We'll come back and I can go back to business as near to usual as I can get after a lockdown. And I can share examples of many different businesses that and even colleagues that took this approach. And the challenge is that what we've seen and what we've learned is that this wasn't just a 3-month situation. So if you were in that camp, if you were in wait and see, you're now having to do catch up because those that were on the other side of this, that were in a kind of act and learn phase, and the act and learn phase is where you recognize that whatever you did was going to be imperfect, but at the same time, you were willing to try it, even though it was imperfect. And in that imperfection, you were going to learn some things. So I can share just an anecdotal example from my daughter, who's 3. She was taking music lessons. It was entirely in person. They shut down the music classes. They pivoted to online. And I watched as the music, organization had to just move and try to learn in real time. And it was imperfect, it was clunky, but they asked the community to join with them and say, look, we're trying the best we can. We know this is imperfect. They were asking, myself and my partner routinely for feedback, saying, can you tell us what this experience has been like for you? So that's one of the key areas, which is to adopt this mindset of acting and learning. And this will help in kind of being able to adapt. And even if you were in wait and see and you're like, oh, that's where I was, it's not too late. You can still adopt this kind of act and learn approach. The other key insight is that there was this idea of kind of pausing old routines, right? So if you were, as was shared in the chat, if you were offering yoga classes, or you were, offering qigong, or whatever it was, you were doing meditation, and you kind of just stopped and said, okay, we're not going to be doing this during COVID. No yoga, no meditation, no qigong. What happened is attrition happened. So people just got out of the routine of doing it. And so by pausing that old routine, you would see clients and students drop off. Conversely, if you created new routines, so for example, I use that example of, my daughter's music class. We as a family adapted to going to that music class online because we already had that time in our calendar. So even though we were in lockdown, that time was already on our calendar to say, oh yeah, this is a time that we normally did music. And so because the music group or the music organization was able to say, yes, we're going to meet at this time, and it's going to be online, it's going to be different, but we're still going to meet. We were able to adapt and create a new routine to going to this adapted music class. Same thing happened with a yoga studio that my partner and I both go to, where they shut down all in-person classes. There was for a little while unclear what was going to happen. And then they emailed out and messaged the community and said, now we're going to be online, same time, different format. But because of that, there was retention. So I continued to go to support this yoga studio. My daughter continued to go to music class. So this key idea about creating new routines, which leads to retention, versus pausing old routines, which will lead to attrition. You'll lose clients and students. And again, as I'm saying this, if you're like, oh no, I'm in the pause old routines category, that's okay. You can still move to create new routines. And I'll talk a little bit about specific strategies. The other key area here is an offering focused approach versus a relationship focused approach. So an offering focused approach would be, I'll use another example. Let's say you were an acupuncturist, right? Your immediate reaction might be, I can't do acupuncture online. It is just not possible. That would be an offering based or an offering focused approach. A relationship focused approach would be, I can't do needlework with a client online. I can't do moxibustion with a client online, but I can still meet with them to check in about their health. We can, if they were on a kind of using herbal supplements or just herbal additions in the diet as kind of nutrition and wellness, looking at foods, right? What kind of foods are you consuming? Are they hot foods? Are they cold foods? And being able to actually pivot a little bit and focus on the relationship, that the relationship was key. It wasn't so much the specific offering. Yes, that naturally has to stop during COVID, but you could still actually maintain the relationship. So this is kind of expanding what we would think of as maybe what we traditionally offer. And this is challenging, right? Because we have to allow ourselves to expand beyond what we used to do and what we used to know. But if you really focus on the relationship with your students and your clients, it means that you're much more adaptable versus if you are still staying, well, these are the offerings I did and that's all I know how to do. There's very little flexibility. There's very little room to be able to adapt. The last one is the kind of keeping existing technologies versus using new technologies. And so for this one, again, I think we've had these examples, but I can share a simple one. There was a local coffee shop that my partner and I really love. We support. They shut down. They totally closed. And we wanted to support them. So we tried to figure out how we could buy a gift certificate. So what we did is we had to go online to their website. We had to find a contact form. We had to submit the contact form. We had to wait to get an email back. We had to respond saying, is there a phone number where we can call you? They said yes. And then once we called them, they said, well, how do we pay you? And they said, well, we don't know yet. We'll have to figure that out. And we said, okay, well, we can wait. Just let us know. And then finally, they got back to us a week later and said, well, here's how you can pay us. And we said, great. And then finally, at the end of it, we were able to actually support the coffee shop. That was a total time of about 2.5 to 3 weeks. Versus another local restaurant here that my partner and I love. Same thing, they shut down. But what they did is they immediately pivoted to new technology. So we called them and we said, we'd like to order some food. We'd like to support, support the restaurant. We love you guys. And they said, that's great. Thanks so much. But can you actually hop off the phone lines and just go online? We're keeping the phone lines open just so that we can communicate with our customers that are picking up for curbside. But everything else is online. Thank you so much for supporting us. So immediately I could go online. They had it very clear on the website. It was a one button click. I could order everything and I could support them. So contrasting those two different experiences, they didn't previously have that technology pre-COVID. They actually had to pivot very quickly and to figure that out. And I know this is daunting because it can sort of be like, in addition to having to do all this other stuff, it's like, now I have to learn a new technology. But without it, it's really, really hard to adapt. So these are some of the key learnings, and just a little bit more here about what the evidence says if you're able to do that. So for those that were in the camp of those kind of spectrums that were on the right-hand side, the ones that were able to adapt more quickly, this is generally the results. And this is based on a lot of different data points. So in-person traffic, of course, went down. It either went completely away because of the restrictions, everything was shut down, or it went down to a bare minimum because of capacity restrictions. But what happened is because online traffic then went up, because there were places and there were ways to be able to plug in as an existing client or student, because there was an online presence. So the net effect was that the revenue for these teachers or these studios or even meditation centers is that it was slightly below or above pre-pandemic levels. Now, the important part here is that the dollar amount was lower. So it was, in general, it was about half of what the in-person amount was, because most people said, I don't really want to pay the same amount for a virtual experience that I pay for an in-person experience. So the dollar amount was about half, but the traffic was about double. So that's where it was about the same or slightly below, or even in other times above, because traffic exceeded double the amount of traffic as in-person. The other thing that tended to happen is that if you adapted, you had less generalized offerings. So for example, come to my studio and we'll just do kind of a general workout, right? Whether it's a general flow sequence, or maybe it's a general core strength. Instead, it was more specialization. So it was like, we're going to focus on a routine that is about core strength for when you're sitting at home and you're working on that computer all day, or we're going to work on shoulders and neck, because we know that almost all of us are sitting over a computer like this all day. And so because of that, specialization went up, generalization went down, and as a result, there were less customers and clients that were leaving. And they actually, and there was less switching to other providers, other people out there, because they said, no, this is relevant to me. I am sitting at the computer all day. I am hunched over like this. Oh, I do feel like my core is not nearly as strong as it used to be. And so because of that specialization, again, that helped with the being able to adapt, less attrition, less switching. Finally, the last area is sort of a time location based. So I saw in the chat, there were a couple of notes about being out, having outside classes, outdoor things. So that was one way to shift from the restrictions of being indoors, right? To go outside. But that doesn't work so well in winter, because then you can, you're still restricted. If it's negative 20 degrees outside, you can't be leading a class outside. Well, maybe, without super bundled up with, the Minnesota gear that we have here, maybe. But other than that, it's going to be really hard to do. And not a lot of people are going to want to do it because it's not a pleasant experience. So what it meant was that those time and location-based offerings went down. Instead, flexibility-based offerings went up. So this would be things like on-demand videos, courses. It would be things like, a membership that allowed you to, access content whenever you wanted it. So you could go to a member-only page and see all this information, so that you could actually, work within your own time frame, what worked for you. And it was important, particularly for clients and students that were dealing with having children at home, schools being closed, having to care for family members, all kinds of things. That flexibility was key. So again, this is what we know from the current evidence. And what happened then is that these new revenue streams actually offset some of the other areas that were impacted. If it was fixed costs like rent, or it was other material costs that you were still incurring, having these additional revenue streams helped to offset that. So just a couple more pieces, then I'm going to pause to see if there are any additional questions. So the next facet is collaboration. And what we know is that in terms of being able to survive in this, when your business model breaks, it meant very specific things. So in order to be able to survive, it meant partnering with colleagues. It meant actually finding other colleagues to talk to. This is why here at Offering Tree, we're so committed to this learning community, because we know that the sharing of information is critical at this time. It also meant that you had opportunities to practice with other people. And if you aren't doing this, I might encourage this. Find somebody that you can practice with. Could be a family member, could be a friend, could be a colleague. And this is especially true if you're new to the online environment. The other key part of collaboration was looking outside of your specific area. So if you were a yoga teacher, you needed to look beyond the yoga world. You needed to collaborate and look and see what were other people doing. You also needed to look to see what can I learn, for example, like, what were the schools doing that might help me here with my classes? And this meant actually breaking out of some of the, little old mindsets that we might have had. And so, a classic example I have for this one is that I learned early on that the teaching that I was doing at university could benefit my community-based teaching, because I was learning these skills that directly mattered for community engagement when I was doing meditation teaching. And conversely, when I was doing meditation teaching, taking some of those techniques to combat Zoom fatigue, like diaphragmatic breathing and actually breaking your gaze away from the computer every so often, those were essential for the teaching that I was doing at the university. So there was a way in which being able to break out of any one particular space mattered, and it mattered for being able to find new ways to support clients and students. The other thing was asking students and clients to join you. So saying, can you join me? This is going to be imperfect. This is going to be, messy. We're going to learn as we go, and yet I want you to join me in this. And so asking for clients and students to become participants rather than just observers. And this was a key part of, again, being able to adapt well. And then asking for support. Again, this is a tough one. It's very similar to talking about money, but some of the most successful adaptations I saw were where there were requests to say, why don't you bring a friend or bring a family member? And that was because there were no longer any geographic restrictions, right? So if my niece in California could come to a yoga class in Minneapolis, and be able to go with my partner and I, that was fantastic, because then we would have a shared experience. And so I remember the yoga studio asking, saying, bring a friend, bring a family member. So we did. And this was a way to be able to ask for support. But it takes us to be able to say, I need to ask for support. I need to recognize that I need to ask my clients to also join and support. And this, again, is that shift from me to we, and it can be a little uncomfortable at first. In terms of innovation, some of the key learnings, I've talked about this a little bit. So access. So this idea that geography was not as much at play if you're online. So that meant that opened up completely new areas for you to be able to engage with students, and students that would never otherwise be able to come. So for example, the meditation group that I am a part of, the meditation community, we have people from all around the world. Pre-COVID, that was not the case. It was only people that lived in Minneapolis. So expanding beyond what our previous idea might have been, also offering asynchronous options. So I talked about this, having recorded things on demand, having pages that students or clients can access when it's a good time for them. And also challenging some of the assumptions you might have about the number of participants. So this has been really true within the meditation community. Many large meditation retreat centers are struggling tremendously during this pandemic. So one of the ways they've successfully adapted is by lowering the price, but increasing the amount of people that can attend, while changing the offering to meet that, to actually meet what's needed in that moment. And so this is, again, another, it's an innovation. It didn't happen pre-COVID. Another part is purpose. So can you reframe things rather than having a loyalty program? Can you talk about it as having a benefactor program? So like everybody in the community is benefiting each other, and we're in this together. We're trying to support one another, and that the yoga and the meditation and the movement are critical aspects of community health and well-being. And so even shifting some of the language, and benefactor may not be the right word, that's a meditation term, I recognize that. So whatever the word is for you, but even not talking about it as loyalty programs, but talking about it as something different. Not being afraid to have a vision. What's your vision, even in the midst of COVID? Really having a community focus. Another key innovation was that having an aspect of commitment. So if you were teaching a series or a course pre-COVID, then it meant that you did better than if you just had weekly or drop-in events. And this is just in general. So this may not be true in your specific situation, but generally, based on the data that we have, if you were teaching a series or a course, you fared better, you did better, you had less student attrition than if you were just doing a weekly, your weekly class, or you were just doing drop-in events. And that's because of commitment. So if I knew that my daughter's music class is always, this time, Thursday at 10 a.m., and I'm committed to that because it's an 8-week class for music, I'm going to be there every week. Whereas if it's a drop-in, it's like, well, this week is really bad. My daughter was not sleeping well last night. I'm just really tired. I'm not going to do that. Also, if it's a course, I know that the participants that are there have all signed up and committed to the course. So it's going to likely be the same group of people more or less each week. So that then increases a sense of a kind of a social dimension of being part of a community. It's kind of another piece of being committed to that course. I talked about specialization. So this is, again, an innovation because it's key right now. If you specialize, you'll have a clearer message. You'll be recognized as an expert within that specialization. People are more likely to refer to you because of that specialization. And on a pure nuts and bolts level with, how Google searches and algorithms and things work within search engines, it's helpful for SEO, search engine optimization. So this is another key innovation. So if you haven't specialized, that's another key part. And then another one is connection. So I mentioned this, really having social time, regular email contact, sharing stories, your own personal stories, asking others to share their stories. Again, self-monitoring, what feels comfortable. But this was another key dimension. So let me pause before I get to actionable steps and see if there's any additional questions or things in the chat. I'll just pause here. And then Corey, if you've got anything you want to chime in, feel free.
No, I'm good. I'm taking it in.
Cool, thanks. So let me check here. I'm just looking at the chat on my end. Open up the questions. Okay, so I don't see any additional chats right now. So what I'll go to is just kind of actionable steps. So I've given you the kind of the context, I've given you the insights. So how do you put this into practice now, which is really a key part. So for actionable steps, here's the first one. Technology-powered relationships. So what do I mean by this? I mean that take the insight from before I mentioned, so have a relation-based approach versus an offering-based approach, and use technology to help streamline and enhance communication and connection. So how can you start to do this? What can you reflect on? So here are the key questions. This is what I would invite you to consider. What can you offer online that builds relationships? This will help you get to this step of technology-powered relationships. What urgent challenges have popped up for your clients and students? And then a personal reflection. What mindsets about being online or using technology are not serving you as the provider? And this is really challenging. I've worked with a lot of clinicians that just say, I hate online, it's terrible, it's never going to be as good as what's in person. If you come in with that mindset, it will also come through. It'll go through the glass, so to speak. You'll pick up on it on some level, even in a virtual experience. And then what technologies can support you rather than hinder you. So if you find yourself spending a lot of time just getting very frustrated and upset with your current existing technology, take that as a cue to say, oh, this is hindering me. Technology is now in the foreground, and what I'm doing, what I care about, is in the background. You want to flip that around. What you do and care about needs to be in the foreground, and technology should always be in the background, just as a support. Shouldn't hinder you. So this is the first step, technology-powered relationships. Next step is partnering to learn. So this is where I would encourage you to partner with at least one other colleague. Some colleague that you know, or that's also a yoga teacher, a meditation teacher, also a studio owner. And if you can't find somebody like that, just find somebody that you feel like you can talk with, that you can share a little bit about your experience. And then also ask your clients to partner with you. So learn together. If you haven't done this, actually do this. Speak to your community about saying, we need to partner together. So some of the key reflections here, again, start with a personal reflection. What are you most afraid of with your business and with your teaching right now? So if we can't name what we're afraid of, we're going to be caught by it. Who is one colleague you can talk to about this fear? So being able to name, to use an old neuroscience phrase, to name it is to tame it. So being able to actually make it conscious and to name it and to acknowledge it is a way to be able to not be immobilized by that fear. On the action level, it's setting one goal. So set one goal for yourself, spend some time, imagine yourself actually completing that goal. This is the importance of rehearsal or practice. Talk about it with friends, talk about it with family, and then ask for support. We almost always drop this last step off. You know, it's kind of been like, well, I don't want to ask for support. I don't want to burden anybody else. But if we don't actually talk about it and then also ask for people to support us in this vision, in this goal, it's less likely to succeed. And then the last one, this is hard. I often will ask my students to do this, so I hope you'll do this with me too, is to vow to be perfectly imperfect and say this to others. Don't try to be perfect. Don't try to get it exactly right. It's impossible. So really take a vow to be perfectly imperfect. And when you're imperfect, be really kind with yourself. And really, recognize it is hard right now. And let's not minimize that. Let's not actually, minimize that this is a really difficult time. And we don't have to, be our own judge and jury. We can actually be, quite kind and patient with ourselves. And then the last one, make meaning. So create opportunities for more meaningful engagement. So I gave you some examples about specialization. You might have a dedicated practitioner's course, set up something that really allows your clients or your students to go deeper with some aspect, whether that's if you're teaching, like fitness, or if you're teaching yoga or meditation or qigong, have something that allows people to go deeper, like a deepening course. Talk about a community vision. If you haven't already, start to think about what that might look like, even in the midst of COVID. And when in doubt, elevate social connection. Always elevate social connection, because we're isolated. We're all isolated in some respect. And for some of us, it's much higher. For others, it's less. But isolation is something that we're also experiencing throughout this pandemic. So elevate the social connection element. So here's a couple reflection questions for you. What's your vision for client well-being, even in the midst of COVID? What course could help because of, not in spite of COVID? So this is a key reframing. What course could help because of COVID, not in spite of it? And how can you create greater meaning, whether that's through inquiry with your community, through experiential learning examples, through reflection. Maybe you set up an email challenge where you send out a weekly reflection question. I've seen some studios do this very effectively. Some meditation teachers do this really effectively. And then the last one here is being able to, how can you really mimic in-person social behaviors? So staying available, before class starts, or staying online a little bit longer so that people can ask questions and connect with you. So as much as we can bring in some of the personal and mimic it, it'll help a lot, because that's what we're craving. We're craving that kind of experience. So at this point, I'm going to turn it all over to questions. And just so you know, I hate it when presenters give you all these advice, but they don't actually do it themselves. So this is my slide to show you that this is what we're doing at Offering Tree, and here's how it maps. So we do these educational webinars because we're trying to make meaning. We're trying to have deeper connections with all of our clients, all of our teachers and health and wellness professionals. And we are trying to, envision this tech-powered relationships by constantly adding new features that will help so that you don't feel like technology is a burden. And then learning community. So whether it's partnering with Conscious Council or talking with all of you, we've got multiple groups. It's really partnering to learn. Not that, don't take anything that I said as the definitive answer, right? These are just reflections based on a lot of different conversations and data that I've been able to look at. But it's also about co-creating and co-learning. So I want to, at this point, turn it over to the chat and look and see. We've got a couple minutes for Q&A. So let's just see what we've got here. So there's been some great discussion back and forth in the chat. So if you have been monitoring that, teach sessions of 6 to 12. So this is a question about I want to teach sessions of 6 to 12 weeks now with 3 to 4 weeks off in between. I fear that 3 to 4 weeks off will be tough on clients or some send them elsewhere. Yeah, so you'll see, I think Renee, thank you, Renee. You offered a perspective there about keep them accountable for practicing on their own would be neat. Maybe some recorded videos they can do, emails, journal. Yes, I agree with Renee's comment there. So finding a way, it could be simple, like an email challenge. It could be just an email that you send out personally saying, I just want to support you during these weeks. We don't have class, but keep practicing. So those are some great suggestions from Renee about how you might do that. Recorded videos, emails, offer journal reflections, a journal prompt. So can you give an example of one goal? Yeah, so I can give you an example of one goal. So an example of one goal that you might set would be, you want to increase the amount of students you have by 20%. And that goal then gives you something that you're going to now start to talk about that goal. So let me go back to that slide here. You're going to imagine that goal. Okay, what would it look like if I had 20% more students? You're going to talk about it with people. I have this goal of getting to 20 more students, and you're going to ask for support. I really want to increase the students that are part of this class by 20%. Does anybody know anyone that would be interested that can help me with this? This is just a simple example, right? Or it might be, if you use a technology example, I just want to try out one new approach. Maybe I want to try doing an email challenge. That's my goal. I've never done that before. I've heard a lot about it. I want to try it. Now imagine yourself, what would be in that email challenge? What might I include that is relevant for my community? And then start talking to people about it. Hey, I'm going to start this email challenge in about a week or 2 weeks from here. Just want to, if you know anybody that's interested, please get the word out. I really want to make it available and accessible. So the power is in being able to create a goal, because then it's going to give you something to direct your energies. Imagine it. So that's the rehearsal or the practice component of it. Talk about it so that others know that you have this goal. If you just keep it internal, no one knows. And then being able to ask for support. All of those are going to increase the likelihood that there's going to be a shift or a change. Let's see, other questions here. Yeah, so there's another one at Judy about maybe shortening the break. So again, another good comment about maybe not having quite as long of a break. The ideas about how to elevate social without Facebook and Instagram. Yeah, this is a really good question. I'm not the resident expert on social media. We have a number of webinars on that topic. So I'll put those on the replay page so that you can see them. So rather than hearing me describe that, I think I'll leave it to other experts. So thank you so much. Excellent workshop. I like, so another comment here, I like Renee's idea of activities to keep momentum during a longer break, maybe a buddy system. Yeah, that can be very effective if you find a buddy or have another kind of, I call them an accountability partner, or what was the one I used? I can't remember. That the accountability partner is not right. There's another term. I had some term for it. I'll see if it comes back to me. But having something to help maintain accountability and support, the sense of being supported. IGTV, Instagram stories. Yeah, those are all helpful. Let's see. If anyone would like yes, thank you, Corey, for putting that in the chat. That's really helpful. So Corey just put in a link if you'd like a yoga legal checklist that's available. Let me check. So we've got just a couple minutes here. Let me open it up to anyone else. Corey, any reflections you have? We got a few more questions here, but anything you'd like to share or reflections?
No, I think it's really wonderful. I think you hit on a lot of really important actionable items and raising some important questions. And I think the insights are the most helpful part. Yeah, I think there's a lot for everyone to take away from it and apply to themselves. And I think even the simple, exercise of setting a goal and enrolling an accountability partner and visualizing it, all of that super, super helpful in addition to the wealth of information. So just on behalf of me, thank you very much. I know that our community greatly appreciates it, and I found it really helpful, and I'm sure everyone did as well.
Well, thank you, Corey, and it's great to hear. So this is an example, right, of partnering. So being able, Offering Tree and Conscious Council, being able to support one another. We are always available for questions. So if even if you're not part of the Offering Tree family, please don't hesitate. You can reach us at support@offeringtree.com. I will post additional resources on the replay page so that you can see some of, I'll post the checklist that Corey put in the chat. And then I'll also post some additional resources if you're interested. I'm happy to hang out here for a little bit if there's additional questions. I also want to respect time. So we're at the top of the hour here. If you have to hop off, please do. If anything I shared today was not useful, not helpful for you, just leave it here with me. Just take whatever you found helpful and useful in your own experience. So again, I'm happy to hang out if there's questions. Otherwise, thank you all for taking the time today, and I hope that was useful. I hope you found something useful here.
Bye, everybody. Sending love. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks all.